Welcome back to On the Move with Victor Shi. This is Victor Shi. It is Tuesday, February 14th. And today we're going to come to you just talking about the news of the day as well as answering some of your questions for an Ask Me Anything. But before we get into that, I can't help but start off today by talking about what happened yesterday night at Michigan State University. This comes barely 5 years after the Parkland shooting, when obviously you had a gunman enter Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida, in Parkland, Florida, and gun down just a bunch of students. And it was just such a horrific day that really kind of captured our nation's problem with gun violence. And 5 years later, this happened yet again at another campus, this time at Michigan State University. So far, 3 have been confirmed dead, 5 have been confirmed injured, at least so far. And so we're waiting for details. We're waiting for police to give us updates. This morning, there was a press conference. Governor Gretchen Whitmer, as well as Representative Lisa Slotkin, as well as some other police officials spoke during that press conference. And I think Elisa Slotkin said it best when she said, you're either for students and children or you're against students and children. And yesterday, we saw the consequences of the failure of, frankly, Republicans to act on gun violence. And I know I don't want to get political with this, but I can't help but get political because there are so many instances in which we see our country reeling from gun violence. We see elected officials and lawmakers saying, we are giving you our thoughts and prayers. We are going to fix this. But what happens? Nothing happens. You see the media focusing on this for maybe a couple of days, maybe a few days, and then the news cycle continues with other news of the day. But this is something that I think hopefully all of us can take a moment and realize this is not normal. Sure, America in already more than 40 days of 2023 has had over 67 mass shootings, but we cannot accept this as the new normal. We cannot become numb to this. This is a uniquely American problem. In every other country that has lower gun violence than the US, the one thing that they've been able to do is pass common sense gun reform legislation. Things like banning assault weapons, things like making sure that we don't have bump stocks, things like making sure that we have red flag laws, things like instituting a nationwide background checks. We aren't even requiring people to take trainings on how to use a gun. So we might as well institute other measures that will dramatically reduce the number of mass shootings. But this is something that Gen Zers have had to grow up with our entire lives. We've been the generation that's been traumatized by these types of shootings. Things like, even things like going into our classrooms and doing lockdown drills. We have to always be in that mindset of fearing whether or not we're going to be the next targets of gun violence. And this is not a way to live. This is not a way for us to survive and live our lives. And I was texting with a friend yesterday about what's going on at Michigan State University. And she told me that she's being sheltered in place, at least last night, and that this is what she had to do for the last few hours. And just imagine yourself in that situation. Imagine yourself as the generation that had to grow up with doing mass shooter drills, that had to grow up with sheltering in place. I mean, literally, we don't know whether or not we will be safe in the next incident, and whether or not, myself just being at UCLA, whether or not we'll be the next targets of gun violence. I mean, this can happen anywhere. And the fact that it happened at Michigan State University does not mean anyone else. It just shows that this can happen truly anywhere, and that our nation has a messed up gun problem. And we have to all use our voices to demand better. The one thing about America is that we all have representatives. We all have state and local officials. We have U.S. representatives. We have U.S. senators. It's up to all of us to use our voices for the better. And I think back to this one Abraham Lincoln quote, public sentiment is everything. With it, you can do anything. Without it, you can do nothing. And, this just goes to show all of us have, I think, power in this moment to do something. It's just a matter of whether or not elected officials will act. And if they don't, guess what? We have an election coming up in less than 2 years for 2024, and every single House of Representative member will be up for re-election. And if they don't do anything to pass gun reform legislation, if Republicans in power don't do anything to address this, we all have a simple choice to make, and that is we have to elect them out of office. That is the only way that I'm convinced that they're ever going to learn, because time and time again, we've seen Republicans have the opportunity to act on gun violence, yet they buck the opportunity at every moment because of the NRA, their lust for power, their lust for money. And as voters, we can't accept this as the new normal. We cannot accept this, and we cannot be numb to this. So I know this probably won't be the last time we have on, or we talk about this uniquely American problem next week. Hopefully, we're going to get on Shannon Watts to talk about this. I've been in contact with her team, but this is just such a tragedy. And my strength and my love goes out to everyone at Michigan State University. But even more importantly, I just hope that there's action. Finally, we saw what happened in Monterey Park. We saw what happened in Half Moon Bay. We saw what happened across the country in January, and now we're in February, and this is what's happening. And it's just such a tragedy on so many levels. So let's keep all of them in our thoughts and hope that Republicans will grow a spine and finally take action. So some other news of the day. This morning, Adam Frisch announced his re-election campaign, or maybe not re-election campaign, that he's going to run for Colorado's 3rd congressional district again against Lauren Boebert. He was on the show just a few weeks ago talking about how he is actively thinking about running for office. And this morning, he announced his run. It was a great ad. I hope all of you check it out. It's on his Twitter page. I also tweeted something out this morning. But we should all remember that this was the closest national race. Lauren Boebert beat Adam Frisch by barely 500 votes. It was such a close election, went into a recount. And in 2024, I think we can all use our voices to make sure that Adam Frisch becomes the next U.S. representative and that Lauren Boebert, even better, never sees political office again, because we've seen what she's been doing ever since the first week of this session, trying to hijack the speakership vote to what she's doing now with a weaponization of government subcommittee, with her being on different committees. I mean, she's just really making an embarrassment out of not only Colorado's 3rd district, but out of our entire Congress. And so I hope that we can all use our voices and get out there come November 2024 and help elect Adam Frisch and boot out Lauren Boebert, who does not belong in Congress. Speaking of people running for office, Nikki Haley has announced her run for office this morning, which is yet another indication of this Republican Party that has no serious and viable candidate who can win in 2024. Remember, Nikki Haley was someone who had every opportunity to say to Trump, no, I'm not going to serve in your administration. No, I'm not going to defend what you are doing. I'm going to be a traditional conservative, a traditional Republican, and actually have some sort of principle and backbone. But instead, what she did was she joined the Trump administration. She basically coddled up to Trump and did everything that he asked her to do. And this was someone who really, tries to have this veneer of sanity, tries to kind of show that she is somewhat competent. But this is someone who is just as crazy, just as extreme, just as insane, frankly, as Donald Trump. And we all have to do our part and not fall for that. She offered this ad this morning and said she wants a new generation of leadership. Well, first of all, she might be a new generation, but she's definitely not a leader. This is someone who doesn't know how to lead, especially after Donald Trump. A real leader would have stood up to Donald Trump and said, look, I'm not going to join what you stand for. But instead, she helped enable the worst in Trump. And I don't think any of us sitting here as voters can forget that. Especially with 2024 coming around. This is going to be an interesting election cycle. We'll see whether or not Trump gets indicted. But even if not, Nikki Haley is not the person who I think we should be wanting to represent the Republican Party. She is truly, as the governor of South Carolina, she's done a host of things to make South Carolinians, their lives harder, trying to pass restrictive voting laws, trying to make it harder for LGBTQ people to live their lives. I mean, just a host of things that show that she is no less sane, maybe a little bit more competent, but no less sane than Donald Trump. So it is truly remarkable. And so Nikki Haley has announced her run for presidency. There was a great New York Times op-ed yesterday by Stuart Stevens of the Lincoln Project and of Resolute Square, who wrote this great piece about how Nikki Haley has left her future behind her. She could have been the person who stood up to Trump. She could have been that person, that leading voice in the Republican Party who resisted the Trump effort, but instead she joined the Trump administration and again enabled the worst in Trump. And so I urge all of you to read that piece by Stuart Stevens in the New York Times. It was released yesterday. Just a great piece contextualizing this moment and how Nikki Haley truly has no political future ahead of her, because none of us are going to forget about what she did during those Trump years. So that's all the news that I have for you this morning. I'm going to be answering some of your questions right now. We got some great questions from our audience. Remember, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box. We can talk about anything here within reason, of course. Let us know what you have questions about, and I will get to them. But some of the questions that we had submitted this morning and throughout the last week is, the first one is from Fred in Irvine, California, which isn't too far from where I am in Los Angeles. He asks, President Biden is taking Republicans to task over threats to Social Security and Medicare. Very true. Is this the way to unite the party and bring in independence, or is it another example of ignoring younger generations? So I don't think it's an example of ignoring younger generations. In fact, I think that for younger people, we have to be reminded that the fact that Republicans are trying to get rid of Social Security and Medicare. Look, we're going to also turn older. We also need these benefits, and this is going to impact our futures. And so I think it's smart for President Biden to focus on calling out Republicans and taking them to task over their really threat to Social Security and Medicare. Even over the weekend, we saw Mike Rounds basically endorse the idea of funding Social Security and Medicare on a year-by-year basis, which effectively means that he's against Social Security and Medicare and that he's willing to slash these programs. So I think it's smart for President Biden to do this. For younger generations, it's relevant. We sometimes don't think about Social Security and Medicare because it's so far ahead in our future, but there will be a time, just like, what's happening with climate change. Sure, it's not, it's immediate, but it's going to affect our lives, come 5, 10, 50 years from now. That's what we're going to have to live in. And I think to talk about Social Security and Medicare right now is a good reminder to young people that this is what we're going to have to live to, and that Republicans don't care about what our future looks like. And so I think it's smart for him to do that. In terms of bringing in independence, I think it's also smart for President Biden to do that as well. For independents and for Republicans, I think they need to be reminded that this is what the Republican Party is. Yesterday I was having a conversation with someone and we were talking about just the number of things that Republicans are doing to try to make lives worse. And you can't help but think about how this is real life. I mean, Republicans, this isn't hyperbole. Republicans are literally trying to strip people of their Social Security and Medicare. And I think for President Biden, he's someone who is notoriously known for not calling out Republicans, who's trying to, unite both parties. But I think this is the moment, if there's any moment, for President Biden to come and talk and really call out these Republicans by name and make it clear to voters that this is what the Republican Party stands for. There is no alternative. I mean, the alternative is the Democratic Party, but at least within the Republican Party, there is no sane Republican Party anymore. Look at what's happening in the House. You have a Kevin McCarthy in a speakership that's hijacked by the far right. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene over the weekend calling Mitch McConnell a Democrat and people raising their hands in support of that. And so I think it's up to President Biden and his administration to go to the American people and say, look, this is the Republican Party. And for independents, for people who are fed up with this Republican Party, you have a home in the Democratic Party, because we are actually a party that will unite people around a common agenda and that will really kind of strive to make your lives better. The Republican Party just isn't. And so I think it's good that President Biden is doing that. I know for some Republicans, maybe that's seen as divisive, but I think for independents, they have to be reminded of, for younger generations, we have to be reminded of that this is what the Republican Party stands for. They're no better than what's happening right now. And so I think it's telling. Christina from Seattle, Washington asked, what did you think of the State of the Union speech? Do you have a favorite thing that you liked about it? And was there anything you wish you heard? I wrote this piece in Resolute Square last week about the youth address to the State of the Union. And personally, I thought that President Biden did everything he needed to during that State of the Union. State of the Unions are always tricky because you have to get so much in such a limited amount of time. And I think there's an argument to be made about possibly revamping the State of the Union so that we can get more things in and we can tell more stories and make it more captivating for a younger audience. But in terms of what he did last week, I thought my favorite part of it was him really taking to task and using the bully pulpit as a way to call out Republicans. He really was able to use that moment and tell Republicans, look, are you for Social Security and Medicare, or are you against it? And he basically cornered Republicans and got them to admit, at least for that night, that they're against cutting Social Security and Medicare. Obviously, that hasn't really proven quite long with all the Republicans now coming out and saying they are for cutting it. But for President Biden to do that, I thought that was particularly powerful in calling out Republicans. And I think just, offering a vision forward. One of the mottos for that speech was finish the job. We are not done with the job yet. And so for his administration, that means, sure, Republicans might be controlling the House, but there's still work to be done. There's still progress to be made. And I think that's important, offering Americans and voters and young people especially. He talked about, gun violence and the need to ban assault weapons, but doing these things that will actually make people's lives better and reassuring them that there is someone in Washington who is in charge, who is committed to making lives better. I think that's important. And in terms of anything I wish I had heard, I think the only one thing that he could have mentioned more is the Supreme Court. There was a great piece in the New York Times by Kate Shaw about why Democrats really need to capitalize on this moment during a time when the courts are shifting rightwards. And I think for President Biden, that could have been a real opportunity to speak in front of the justices and also speak to the American people about how our courts really are not for us anymore. I mean, they stripped away the right to choose. Clarence Thomas said that he isn't stopping there, and Republicans don't seem to be stopping there either. And so for President Biden, I think he could have emphasized that point a little bit more. But overall, I thought it was a very, very strong speech. And I thought President Biden did a great job at really contextualizing the moment, both for where the Republican Party stands, but also kind of where we are as a country and what he wants to do going forward. And so I thought it was a great speech all around, really, just in terms of modern State of the Unions. I thought probably one of the best, if not the best State of the Union that I've heard, and definitely the best speech that I've heard from President Biden so far. That is all the time that we have for this week. Please continue sending your questions. We have some great ones that I didn't get to today. We'll get to them hopefully later this week, but if not, next week for sure. For the rest of this week, we have some great guests lined up for you. Tomorrow, we're going to have on Dean Obadella, who is a great just commentator, MSNBC columnist, does a great radio show. Check him out. He's often on the Mary Trump podcast, so this time it'll be fun to interview him. Dean is tomorrow at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time. On Thursday, we're going to have on Molly Jong Fast, who unfortunately wasn't able to join us last week, but is able to join us on Thursday. It's going to be a great episode talking about the Republican Party and where it stands. On Friday, we're going to have on Eric Deagle Fing. He is a someone who talks a lot about public health, someone who really is beating the drum about long COVID, about how we cannot let the ball pass for COVID. So tune into that. Again, it's every day, 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time, right here on youtube.com/Politicon. You don't want to miss them. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Like this channel. And I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Tuesday.